Sometimes it doesn't matter how healthy you eat, how much water you drink, or the hours you spend in the gym. If you ask me, probably the most important factor that will go into determining your overall health and wellness is really where and especially when you are. Like, in history. Sorry, forgot we don't do that here. Okay, moving on. By the way, if you're wondering why you're not seeing Patrick right now, that's because a bunch of us here at a group called We Create EDU are doing a huge back-to-school collaboration, which basically means a bunch of us are taking over each other's channels. My name's Willie, and I usually make science and social studies videos that try to explain basically everything going on in the world over on my channel, Khanubis. There are currently videos being made between these 6 channels, and yes, there will be a playlist in the description below after this video is done. Now, we all know that today we're living much longer than we ever were before the Industrial Revolution, and while a lot of those short lifespans were really just crazy high infant mortality rates pushing down the average, it cannot be denied that we're kind of living in the best time in human history when it comes to health and medicine. So far, at least. Okay, so obviously there are still plenty of diseases that if someone were to get today, their chances of long-term or sometimes even short-term survival are pretty much slim to none. But back in the ancient world, that list was a lot longer, like scarily longer. In fact, one huge sign of evidence when looking at fossils for determining whether or not an animal lived in a group are actually signs of healing in broken bones, especially limb bones. I mean, think about it. If you were to break your leg today, sure, it would hurt and cost a lot, but you could just get a cast and crutches for a couple months, and if all goes well, which it probably will, you could just walk it off almost as if it never happened. Contrast this with an animal that lives on its own in the wild. When it breaks its leg, that's just it done. Sure, a lot of this has to do with being able to get food, water, and shelter, and while you do have a lot more access to this stuff in civilization, even with civilization, breaking your leg in the ancient world wasn't exactly as survivable as it would be today. Because keep in mind, broken bones can also be infected. Now, sure, broken bones can and still do get infected today, but back in the year whatever 1000 BC, it wasn't really quite as survivable. Arguably one of the most important discoveries in recent medical history was the idea of germ theory. No, not game theory, germ theory. And thus, when we started to pioneer vaccines and antibiotics, we at least somewhat knew what we were doing, which was definitely a bonus from the past, let's be honest. Now, of course, before germ theory, people did still try their best to diagnose and cure diseases, just in a slightly different manner. One of the most famous ideas in medical history was the idea of the 4 humors. You know, blood, phlegm, different kind of phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. This idea, by the way, is called humorism. It was, of course, believed that, in order to remain healthy, one must keep a precise balance of all 4 of these humors, which led to the common practice of bloodletting, which persisted for over 1,000 years despite no real evidence that it really worked. In fact, it may have even made things worse a lot, if not most of the time, like what happened to George Washington. I swear, if you hear about the story of his death, you'll be very thankful not to be living in the 18th century. There was also a very common widespread idea that bad smells were the culprit of disease, which is why those plague doctors from the 14th century wore those bird masks. Those were stuffed with herbs to keep out all the bad smells. Actually, come to think of it, those are kind of like medieval gas masks. That's actually kind of a cool way to think of those. Now, this idea was called miasma, and it did do some good for public health, especially in Victorian London. I mean, Jon Snow certainly knew his stuff. They were somewhat on the right track, though. It's just that they thought that bad smells were the cause of the disease, when in fact they're a frequent byproduct of many diseases. I mean, if I were to hold up a piece of rotten flesh, and you could smell it through the camera, it would not smell good, and for good reason. Same thing with things like feces, vomit, and other potentially diseased materials. We don't want to get anywhere near them, so we've evolved an early warning system to try to keep us away from all the cholera. And of course, this is why you should be very thankful if you have a working toilet in your house. Seriously, be thankful for those things. They're a miracle of recent engineering. Of course, how we cure diseases is a big chunk to understanding ancient medicine, but that's not all there is. Another big chunk is understanding how the ancients understood human anatomy, which is to say, they didn't. Now, I mean, sure, you can always dissect a human body, but in order to dissect something, they generally have to be dead, and if they're not dead, that would probably be a result anyway. So you wouldn't really get to know how the organs actually work. You wouldn't be able to study any of the interactions that go on to actually keep us alive. And actually, in a lot of cases, you couldn't always just dissect a human body, since many governments and religious institutions forbade the act. One of the biggest names in ancient medicine, taken widely seriously up until the Renaissance, was the 2nd century Greco-Roman physiologist Galen. Claudius Galenus was widely known for his ideas and theories in humorism, which was already invented by some even more ancient Greeks, and for his descriptions of the human anatomy, which were pretty accurate, until it was revealed 1,000 years later that actually no, they weren't accurate at all. Partly because it actually turned out he was dissecting monkeys and pigs, which are quite decidedly not humans. Although when you think about it, this was a long time before the days when we started thinking of ourselves as equal to all the other animals on Earth, so 1 point for Team Evolution, I guess? Another notable example of just how wrong we've gotten things comes from ancient Egypt. Yes, I know. Especially in mummification, which I feel really tells a lot about how ancient Egyptians viewed our organs. Now, upon mummification, they would remove the stomach, lungs, liver, and intestines, and they would store them inside these things called canopic jars. You know, those things with the animal heads on them. They would also remove the brain through a special hook through the nose, but they would throw all the material away since they believed it was just some sort of skull stuffer. They actually believed that the heart was the seat of the soul, so the heart was actually placed back inside the body after mummification. What about when we started to get things right? Well, one good example of this was the advent of vaccination. A practice called variolation started in the mountains of what is now China's Sichuan province back in the 11th century. And it involved basically blowing up crushed smallpox scabs up people's nostrils. This was invented after a Buddhist nun noticed that people who got smallpox would never get it again, assuming they survived the disease in the first place, but yeah. Around 700 years later, English physician Edward Jenner noticed that maids who got cowpox would also never get cowpox ever again, but they were also immune to smallpox. This was somewhat widely known at the time, but Jenner put a spin on it. You see, it had already been a somewhat common practice to take pus from a smallpox victim and inoculate healthy people through 3 to 5 scratches on the arm. But around 3% of people who got the procedure would still die soon after from, smallpox. Jenner really just noticed that using a weaker version of the disease would still yield very similar results, just without all the dying since cowpox isn't used to human bodies. This is actually what vaccines do today, since the virus samples they carry are weakened, dismembered, or dead, so they aren't really all that harmful to us. In fact, they are so harmless to us that vaccines actually have a little bit of aluminum that they also inject into our bloodstream just to get the immune system to kind of go and check the area and encounter the virus. After they were finally accepted by the scientific community, which if you study history of science you'll know doesn't always go immediately, vaccines quickly became widespread, saving millions if not billions of lives and all but eradicating diseases like smallpox. Now, all this talk about the past is great and all, but there are still other forms of medicine used today, other than conventional medicine. Some of the most notable examples are things like homeopathy and herbal remedies. Trust me, I grew up in Portland, everyone talks about this stuff. Now, these have been widely promoted as a kind of alternative to common pharmaceuticals. Now, some herbal remedies can of course help. I mean, a lot of pharmaceuticals are plant-based. But of course, another famous form of alternative medicine is homeopathy, which... oh boy. Kurskasak explained this way better than I will, but basically it involves taking what would normally cause your ailment that you're suffering from and dissolving it in alcohol or distilled water at a varying potency. They are often packaged in sugar tablets, but the thing is that some of these mixtures are so potent that it's basically all sugar. So what am I saying here? Am I just dissing on forms of medicine that aren't quite what we are generally used to using today? Well, no, because that would be like saying that the Roman Empire had a terrible communications infrastructure. By today's standards, yeah, sure, I guess. But by first century standards, as in when the Roman Empire actually existed, their communications and transportation infrastructure were cutting edge, internet or no internet. What I'm basically saying here is, we've gotten a lot of stuff wrong throughout history. We've also gotten a lot of stuff right throughout history, and we've learned through our mistakes. And all that trial and error has given us time-tested medicinal practices, and will only continue to do so with the relentless forward march of technology. So Patrick, how did I do?
That was awesome, Willie. You did great. Everybody else that's watching, make sure to go check out Willie's channel. His link is in the description below, and it is right around here somewhere. If you want to go check it out, make sure to subscribe to him, and check out the rest of the We Create EDU playlist. It's also linked up in the description, and otherwise, have fun, be good. See you next time.